Welcome to The Tax Factor, the UK's top tax podcast from Blick Rothenberg, the tax, accounting and business advisory firm. This week with Roger Holman and Neil Insull.
Welcome to The Tax Factor, the UK's top tax podcast. I'm Roger Holman.
And I am Neil Insull.
After 3 podcasts in a row, Nimesh has gone for a well-deserved lie down and handed the studio keys over to me and Neil.
I was just checking. The last time we presented together, Roger, was way back on episode 48. So we're episode 72 now, I believe. So they obviously thought it was so successful that they've waited another 24 episodes before bringing the dream team together again. What does that say?
Well, I think it just means that they don't want to spoil everyone with our dulcet tones too often.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that.
We've been looking this week at the record tax receipts that the government has received in January. Now, of course, that is about £111 billion in 1 month, which is a massive amount of money. They've also doubled the amount of fines they issued on late tax returns. Is there anything else in that, Neil?
You mean in the actual amount of money that they've brought in this month? I think it's probably no surprise. I think, there's clearly been changes over the last few years, like the frozen thresholds, which have obviously brought many more people into higher rates of tax and more tax being collected. So it's probably no surprise that the receipts this month were high, record high. I think behind the scenes, what we've also got to acknowledge is that when those numbers are looked at comparison with the amount of spending by the government, what we've seen here is actually a government borrowing figure which is way higher than was originally budgeted. So even though these tax receipts are coming in at record highs, they're still overspending, as the government might see it, in government departments. And I guess what we're going to see is perhaps a reaction to that in the spring statement that's coming up.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the spring statement coming up on the 26th of March, and I think that is going to mean that Rachel Reeves is going to struggle to stick to her edict of one large budget statement a year. I think she's going to have a lot of difficult decisions to be made in the spring. She's going to have to find some more money from somewhere, isn't she?
Well, yeah, I think we know that they're going to have to try and find some more money from different government departments, from the NHS and elsewhere. I think there's going to be significant pain for some departments than others. So let's see what happens on the spending. We don't really, in our business, focus on that. We're much more interested in how tax is being collected. And you're right, Roger, that you'd have thought after the massive plugging of the black hole back in the autumn, with huge tax rises on employers in relation to employers' NIC, you'd have thought she's done the business. But no, I think the latest figures, the lack of confidence in the economy since the budget, the amount of uncertainty generally, geopolitically, everything is causing concern, I think, not just in the UK, but around the world. And we're going to see a reaction to that with probably some more tax rises. I mean, just before I go on into perhaps some of the things that have been leaked by the Treasury recently, I'll get back onto my hobby horse, which is to say how probably unfair and a little bit cruel some of those NIC rises were for employers which were announced back in the autumn but will come into effect in April. I mean, in particular, I know the rate is increasing and that in itself is unhelpful to 15%, but the reduction in the threshold on which NIC starts to be paid for each employee, that threshold is being reduced by more than half. And that, it just seems a little bit a cruel way for people to incentivize employers to take on staff, to promote, etc. And I think particularly for those lower paid where industries in which there's lower paid, like the hospitality and retail industries, I think that was a particular issue which I would love to see corrected, and I think many of our listeners would want to see that as well. So I don't know. Let's see whether Rachel sees sense and reverses some of the announcements from last time. I'm not hopeful, particularly optimistic. And as we said before, she's more likely not to give away, but to actually try to increase taxes. And I think one of the things that was mentioned, or certainly leaked by some Treasury officials, was the potential for the individual savings account limit to be changed. So at the moment, ISAs are at 20,000 per year, and that means you can invest in cash and stocks and shares up to 20,000 a year and not be taxed on the receipts, whether they're dividends or interests and on capital gains. So that itself has been really well received over the years, and that limit of 20,000 has increased over the years as well. And it's not just for the high paid, it's for the low paid. And there's lots of statistics suggest that a lot of people on basic rate pay, for example, will be investing into ISAs. Well, the latest news is that that may well change, and that 20,000 may remain, but the amount that can be invested into cash may be restricted, and perhaps as low as £4,000. So I don't know what you think about that, Roger.
Well, I think I've heard some interesting commentary about ISAs over the last year. In particular, the point that, we've got quite a generous level of ISA savings available, but a lot of the actual investment in ISAs isn't actually carried out in the UK. So ISAs that invest in stocks and shares aren't restricted to UK investments. They can be investments worldwide. And there are some commentators that suggest that perhaps if you are going to allow investments to grow tax-free within a UK tax-favoured wrapper, they should be investing in UK assets.
But they dropped that idea, didn't they, Roger? I thought there was going to be a UK or GB ISA, and then they decided that was a dead duck. And
at the moment, how many times
they're
have we
waiting
seen...
for you to become a Treasury official, aren't they, Roger?
Yes,
maybe you should reapply. Maybe you should resign.
We've seen tax measures come back every few years, so this could be one of those boomerang measures that we get.
Well, look, I would be disappointed because I like cash ISAs. I think there's a lot of people who quite like the certainty of getting your cash back by investing into something which is risk-free. So I like that. A lot of people do. Again, I've seen some comments say that even if you block the cash ISA bit, you could invest in cash-like stocks and shares, so cash funds or debt funds, which give you a similar return to cash. So all is not lost necessarily, but we'll see what the measures, if any, will look like come the spring statement. The other thing that I will quickly mention, I don't think we've seen much talk about it yet, is whether the government will pounce on some of the tax advantages that are given to EIS, so Enterprise Investment Scheme, or the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, SEIS or EIS. Now, these are investments that are made essentially by perhaps people with a bit of loose change who are prepared to lose their money as well as to accept that there's probably high returns as well. And these are investments into certain particular types of company, and there are some rich rewards in terms of tax advantages associated with EIS investment and SEIS investment. Two of them are which is that there's income tax relief on the amount invested. And for SEIS, that's 50% on a maximum of 200,000 investment. And for EIS, it's 30% tax relief on an investment up to $1 million or even $2 million if it's a particular type of EIS investment. There's also CGT exemptions. So you invest for 3 years, you get completely zero tax on a gain on selling. And if you make a loss, you can use those losses against income as well. So there's some really good reliefs. There's also deferment reliefs and reinvestment reliefs. So I won't go into those, but there's a whole host of fantastic opportunities to get tax relief through EIS and SEIS. The question is, are these too generous? Would the Chancellor look at these as perhaps an easy way to perhaps find a bit of extra cash in terms of removing some of the release or restricting them? I don't know what you think, Roger. What's in the pipeline?
To be honest, I don't think there's a huge amount of tax at stake with these investments. The reliefs are incredibly generous, but they are there to encourage investment into small trading businesses, which are by their nature very risky. So it's the government trying to encourage people with a bit of spare cash to let small businesses benefit from that. I think if they did restrict reliefs along these lines, then we could see even more screaming from the business community following the reduction of BPR to then restrict SEIS and EIS.
I agree. It would be a bit of a political own goal, I think, perhaps, to look at it. But nothing seems to be off the table. So I mention it. We hope not. And in fact, I think there's a lot of industry bodies which would persuade the government to say, actually, it's probably a net receipt in the end for the government in terms of the implications of these investments and the opportunities it gives us younger companies to benefit from that. Anything you wanted to add in terms of anything else you think Rachel might attack?
Well, I mean, the annual thing that comes up in these talks is always pensions, whether higher rate relief will be restricted, whether the amount you can invest will be restricted, whether there'll be extra tax charges. I mean, they've already attacked pensions in the autumn statement in the future, making them liable to inheritance tax, whether they would go one step further. One thing that often comes up with pensions is the very generous 25% tax-free allowance and whether that should be reduced to 20 or even 5%. There's a lot of actuarial commentary on this that shows significant sums of money would be saved by the Treasury.
As you say, if she didn't do it in the autumn, why would she do it again in the spring? We don't know, but I guess if we can't pay for our Navy, then maybe that's the way that they'll have to scrimp and save to do it.
The other interesting tax relief that never really gets a mention is the gift aid relief, where you give some money to charity and they can effectively claim an extra 25%.
I honestly didn't think you were aware of such a relief, Roger.
Always goes on my tax return, Neil.
I have every doubt.
But interestingly, gift aid was actually introduced about 35 years ago. In fact, it was exactly 35 years ago.
Well, before you were born, Roger, I would say.
Why, thank you, Neil. Thank you. It was quite restrictive when it was first introduced. And sadly, I'm old enough to remember some of the restrictions that were in place at that time. But following Gordon Brown getting into power and deciding that he wanted to extend gift aid, and that was 25 years ago. It's been incredibly generous so that everyone can claim it, no matter how big or small the gift, no matter whether it's regular or one-off. So it's a very generous relief. And you wonder whether it's the government's place to effectively gift to charity.
Ooh. There was a stunned silence there after that, wasn't there? I tell you what, it's an interesting thought, and I think all of those things need to be, considered as potential suspects. What I was going to say, Roger, after talking about all of those points, is that there's the elephant in the room from the last budget, which was never announced, and I don't know whether you can guess what I'm thinking about. But before you even guess, I'll tell you, Roger. Fuel duty. Why on earth isn't the Chancellor thinking about raising fuel duties? I have no idea. It just seems to be such an easy win. It's long overdue. It fits within the sort of the principles of a green economy and the government supporting that. Why on earth isn't she doing that, Roger? Put you on the spot.
I think the only reason that anyone can come up with is that it is an attack on small business, because a lot of small businesses use their cars, their vans, their trucks to actually ferry things around.
They should walk or get on their bike, as a prominent politician once said. Get on your bikes.
Or even go electric.
Go electric. Yeah, maybe.
But I don't know. I think fuel duty should, in theory, be raised. There's no reason for it to have been frozen for quite as long as it is. But it's just another one of those things that the government could do.
Mr. Angry here from St Albans wants a fuel duty increase, okay, rather than actually find these spurious ways of increasing taxes elsewhere. But hey-ho.
I did mention at the start of this that the government had some record late filing penalties in relation to tax returns. The late filing penalty for a tax return is only £100. Now, in the US, late filing penalties can be up to £10,000 per return. I mean, that's certainly a deterrent for filing late. Do you think there's an option for the government to increase our filing penalties?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think this is long overdue. When did the £100 come in, Roger? I mean, that was before
96.
For £100 from 96, I mean, it should be, as you say, it should be significantly higher. I think, I've got to be careful what I say because a lot of our clients
pay £100 for us to file them late.
Pay £100. But I don't think there's really many excuses for filing a tax return late. If it was higher, people would actually be much more inclined to file earlier and avoid the penalty. I mean, in fact, if you didn't have until the 31st of January and you put the filing date in as, say, end of August, and put in a high penalty, you get people filing tax returns. You get 90% of people filing tax returns then. I'm not suggesting they need to pay the tax earlier, but I think human nature, as you know, Roger, is to procrastinate and defer as long as possible. And if people aren't going to pay on time or even file on time, then penalise is what I say. Sorry, should I be saying that? That's a personal view and not a view of Blick Rothenberg. But I honestly think that there needs to be some deterrent, and I want people to be compliant and stick to the rules. That's what I really want.
Well, as they say on Top Gear, on that bombshell, that's about all we've got time for this week.
The Tax Factor from Blick Rothenberg.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not check out our sister podcast, Brave Business? Currently number 1 and 2 in the investment and business podcast charts. Hosted by journalist and broadcaster Declan Curry, the latest episode dives into the founder's mindset, what it takes to lead, grow, and adapt as a business owner. Tune in now on our website or wherever you get your Tax Factor podcast.
So here's what the marketing team tell me to say. We release a new episode of The Tax Factor every Friday on the Blick Rothenberg website and all the usual podcast platforms, so you can listen wherever is most convenient. We record and release them in less than 24 hours. Fresh podcasts. Can I say fresh podcasts? So you always get the very latest news and updates. And if you have enjoyed the podcast, despite Roger and me being on it, please subscribe and give us a rating or review. Next week, Rihanna Earl and Ellie Theachari return as we move into budget month. Actually, it's spring statement month. Can I say that?
I think we changed that to spring statement month.
Yes. So next week, Rihanna Earl and next week, Rihanna Earl and Ellie Theachari return as we move into spring statement month. But by my reckoning, we'll be back for episode 96. So until then, it's goodbye.
Have a great weekend and goodbye.
That's the Tax Factor. If you enjoyed the Tax Factor, please like, share, and subscribe. Join us again next time on the UK's top tax podcast, The Tax Factor. The Tax Factor is a Blick Rothenberg production. Copyright 2025.